We deal in paint, pigment, light and shadow, realism, surrealism, impressionism, and ghost stories.
An interest in the oddball, a predilection toward the bizarre. And this place is nothing if it isn't bizarre.
There's no admission, no requirement of membership, only a strong and abiding belief in the dark at the top of the stairs, or things that go bump in the night. The name of this place, should you have come in here accidentally out of the rain, is the Night Gallery.
Welcome back, art lovers, to Midnight Viewing, the Night Gallery podcast, where we discuss Night Gallery, Rod Serling's follow-up to The Twilight Zone. I'm Father Malone, and with me here in the gallery are Bollywood Cinema Club's Mr. Chris Stache.
There's nothing about tomorrow in the diary. It's blank. It's empty.
And from the files of Police Squad's own, Mr. Mike White.
Cthulhu?
All right. On this...
Wow. You're about as convincing as Carl Reiner.
Slightly more. Although, we'll get to it. All right, we are talking about Season 2, Episode 8, which aired on November the 10th, 1971. Now, just to let you know, although I intend to review this episode with my current critical mind, this one holds a really special place in my heart. I saw it at the right age and the right time. Nevertheless, we'll get to it. This episode is split into 4 segments, and those segments are The Diary, A Matter of Semantics, Big Surprise, and Professor Peabody's Last Lecture.
Subject: a common enough item utilized by teenagers and tycoons. The daily journal in which we notate the happenings of our day-to-day existence. But in this instance, a unique periodical that doesn't record what was, but rather predicts what will be. Its title: The Diary. It's our initial offering in the Night Gallery.
The Diary was written by Rod Serling and directed by William Hale, starring Patty Duke, Virginia Mayo, Lindsay Wagner, and 2 uncredited performances, the first being Felix Silla, dressed as Baby New Year. I bet most people know him from his most famous performance in Samuel Bronkowitz's Catholic Schoolgirls in Trouble. Or Cousin It. He was actually Cousin It in the original Addams Family. The other uncredited cameo is Sean Astin, Samwise Gamgee himself, who is inside Patty Duke. She was pregnant with him during the filming of this particular episode. And the episode
Isn't
itself...
that the name of Sean Astin's autobiography, Inside Patty Duke?
That's right.
I really hope not.
Be a weird way to go for a guy with such a long and storied career, just Inside Patty Duke, the Sean Astin story.
We thought he was such a sweet boy, that Sam. Now, this one tells the tale of a television gossip columnist, played by Patty Duke, who receives a gift from one of her targets, a faded old screen goddess, played by Virginia Mayo, a diary that has a peculiar habit of telling not what happened, but what will. What'd you think of this one, Mike?
I think I enjoyed this one. It felt a little rough at times. Like, it felt like this was like a first draft and they could have gone a little farther and tightened up some things. The twist worked for me. I really thought that Virginia Mayo threw herself off the balcony, because I think we cut away before she gets to the door, or I just kind of assumed that she threw herself off the balcony. But when they said, oh, she got hit by a car, I was kind of thrown out a little bit, like, oh, okay, that's a weird way to go. But this whole idea of having the diary that predicts what's going to happen, that was a pretty cool idea. And Patty Duke, I'm not sure if she really pulled it off for me or not. She didn't look like Patty Duke to me in this episode. I don't know if it was the wig or what was going on, but it took me a little bit to be like, yeah, I guess that is Patty Duke. It just, something about her seemed a little different to me. Maybe it was that glow of pregnancy that I just never saw before.
What about you, Chris?
It's interesting. It's an interesting way to open this episode with this segment, because I like the idea. I think the twist and kind of the outcome is interesting and fun, but okay, a terrible person got their comeuppance, and it's because she couldn't get over the fact that she doesn't know what tomorrow's entire day lays out for her or what will happen. Like, I guess, all right. I guess the story didn't engage me as much as I hoped it would. And Patty Duke's character is fine. She's not so reprehensible that you want to see her get her just desserts, but she does in the end, I guess.
Oh, I think she does get what she deserves. I agree with both of you. I think having her be a gossip columnist taking on a faded screen idol was just Rod Serling writing what he knew, and he should have somehow tied it a little, her occupation and their feud should have been tied in a little bit more with prediction or something, just because that's her means of revenge, of Virginia Mayo's. She, by the way, she bought I know she, in dialogue, she says that she bought the diary at a local shop, a curiosity shop. And the only thing I could think about was the Frogurt, the delicious Frogurt that must be on tap there. But
Simpsons is everywhere, man. It's ever present all the time. The longer times goes on, the more prescient The Simpsons honestly feels. It's astounding.
A friend of mine used to call it the Bible now because we quote it more often than the actual Word of God.
Homer begat Bart, begat Lisa, begat.
There's no answers in this book.
I liked this one, actually. I know I've been kicking Rod Serling a lot this season, but I thought this script is pretty good, aside of the dialogue, which is his thing. He always overwrites, and he allowed himself, by giving these characters the occupations that they had, another opportunity to do that. But I do think it's structured well. I do think the twist is effective. I didn't see it coming. This is, Mike, thanks to you, I got to read the script for it. And a lot of things became very clear. Yeah, a lot of things became very clear reading. And that is, Rod Serling is an excellent writer. The dialogue is terrible, but the descriptions, oh my God, it's like reading a novel. You can see why most of his stuff just sailed right past anybody, because it reads great. But it's like comic book dialogue, though. You read it on the page and it makes sense, but you hear it and it just sort of hits your ear wrong. Having said that, overall, I think this is pretty strong. Certainly from him on this show. He's had a few stronger, but this season, virtually not at all. So, yeah, I dug this one.
That's a pretty low. That's damning something with rather faint praise, though.
Listen, I'm just trying. I'm just trying to be fair.
This season has been pretty bad overall.
I just want to give the man his due,
Well, and again, I'm right there with you, because, like you said, I mean, we have spent. Not every episode, but anytime Rod Serling writes an episode, we have to point out that, Rod Serling made such a big deal about taking a step back from this show and being angry that there are these blackout bits that he won't even do intros for because he doesn't like them and it's not in keeping tonally with what he wanted with the show. All that aside, he hasn't done a great job turning in scripts in this second season. He just hasn't. And this one is pretty good. But it's pretty good for the second season of this show.
I honestly thought this was based on a short story because it did feel so solid. And I was curious. And when I went to look, I was like, oh, it's not a short story. That's interesting, because it feels like somebody had taken the time and done this, and maybe it was just a little bit of a sloppy adaptation. So I was very surprised when I was like, oh, this is an original script. That's very curious.
Yeah, that again, I can't help but praise Serling over and over, because I had the same thought. It is so tight and so pointed that he must have adapted it. And I said this last season when he lost control of the show, that every time he comes up with something good, I'm going to sort of be doubly mad at him that he was reserving these. This is not a new story. I know he had it in his pocket if it wasn't written already, in the trunk. So, why wouldn't you give us this last season and foment your position here? So, anyway, our next segment is called A Matter of Semantics, which seems as likely a caption to this one-panel joke. It's written by Gene R. Kearney, no surprise, and directed by Jack Laird, starring Cesar Romero and his mustache, and E.J. Peaker, which is my new favorite name. It's about Dracula dropping into a blood bank for a loan. Chris, tell me about this one.
Can I just make a noise that this episode segment was expecting from me? Yuck, yuck. So there you go. It gave me a substantial amount of yucks, substantial amount being 3. And that's all it wanted, and that's all it's going to get. It's a Playboy blackout. I mean, it's just a one-panel comic. Jesus. I mean, what's funny is that these one-panel comics are all Universal monsters, it would seem. I guess that's the only thing that they could go to. I mean, it makes sense, because it's, again, a still now even part of our pop culture kind of quilt, as it were, that I think most everybody knows who Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and the Bride of Frankenstein are. So doesn't surprise me that these blackout sketches keep being Universal monsters, but I think we've gotten Dracula once or twice at least, Frankenstein's monster, Phantom of the Opera even.
I would have thought that the name of this blackout skit was A Midnight Visit to the Neighborhood Blood Bank, and it's not.
No, that's weird too, because I knew of both segments, and for the entire time I've had them confused because that's the obvious title for this one. I guess that's the only really clever thing going on here, this Matter of Semantics.
Right.
Although the episode, this segment, this 2-minute nonsense is not a total loss because we do get to see Cesar Romero sort of being his effortlessly charming self. And good to see him sporting the stache instead of hiding it under pancake makeup as the Joker.
He's fucking suave, man.
I don't think there's anything else to say about this one.
He looks good as a vampire. That's the takeaway. At least he doesn't look unbelievable as a vampire, right?
Yeah. I think that Dexter Riley should have turned him into a vampire.
Yeah, right. Would have been a better way to treat him.
Absolutely. The computer wore vampire shoes. Before we get to the next segment, this season I've been highlighting talent behind the Night Gallery. This season we're getting 2 stories written by this man, including the next segment. I don't think anyone even remotely interested in speculative fiction would not know him. But if you don't, then do yourself a favor and seek out anything by Richard Matheson. His association with Night Gallery is obvious. He was one of the original contributors to The Twilight Zone from the very first season. But by the time Serling hired him in 1959, Matheson had already published nearly 100 short stories and 6 novels, including The Shrinking Man, which became The Incredible Shrinking Man, and I Am Legend, just minor works like that. He ran in a circle of writers known as The Group, or the Southern California School of Writers, that consisted of Matheson, George Clayton Johnson, William F. Nolan, Charles Beaumont, and Ray Bradbury. During his tenure at the Twilight Zone, he penned Nick of Time, The Invaders, and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. He was a screenwriter behind a clutch of Corman Poe movies like House of Usher and Pit and the Pendulum and Comedy of Terrors. Around the time that he did his work here on Night Gallery, he 100% transformed a rather slight novel by Jeff Price into the greatest paranormal journalist of all time in Carl Kolchak, because he wrote Night Stalker and Night Strangler and Trilogy of Terror. My God, it's too much, and I'm only scratching the surface. So I just want to exhort you to go out and read Richard Matheson. And even if none of his work interests you, you should still be thankful for him, because without him, there'd be no Wild Stallions and no Being Excellent to Each Other, because his son, Richard Christian Matheson, is one of the co-creators of Bill and Ted.
I was about to say, is Richard Matheson's greatest contribution to the Twilight Zone is the segment that gets remade every time they do the goddamn show, is what it feels like. And it's the segment that I, for whatever reason, in my mind, closely associate the Twilight Zone with Shatner and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. That's the Twilight Zone segment for me personally. And so I am always thankful that Richard Matheson was the one who did it, because yeah, I mean, I Am Legend gets a bad rap now because of, the movie that came out that more people, I think, have seen than any other I Am Legend property. But the book is so good. We've talked about it before. I don't know if it was here or on Twilight Zone or something, but they have yet to adapt it the right way where the actual fucking title of that book makes sense. Right? They have yet to make the name of the book make sense in terms of the story. But I think it's one of the great sci-fi novels, period.
100%. I mean, you can't deny the power of that book. And as you said, how have they not come up with a decent filmed version of it? It's such a simple little story, and yet every time they do it, they either do it too small or too big, or, okay, the Omega Man's great. There's no question the Omega Man is great, but as its own thing, not necessarily as an adaptation of I Am Legend. At least they changed the title.
Who is the legend? Tell us who the legend is, please.
I'm sure, Father Malone, you've seen The Last Man on Earth, the one with Vincent Price.
Oh, yes. Which I like as well, too.
Yeah, I think that's as close as we're ever going to get.
Yeah, because, in the book, it's very small scale. It's just him and his Pasadena house, and there's no grand mansion he's in or no, high rise in New York. I don't know what any of the adaptations are going for, honestly. They all seem to miss the point, which is just one man, a normal dude who has to figure this stuff out on his own. He's not a scientist or anything. He just has to work hard to figure out his situation, and by then it's too late. Anyway, the next time they make I Am Legend, they should make it for $2 million, and then they have a chance of making it as good as it can be.
I mean, it's better to just expand the scope of the source material to the point where it's completely unrecognizable and then it didn't even matter you were adapting it to begin with. I like that more, frankly.
Yeah, I want Elk running through Times Square and some sort of video game adaptation version.
Yeah. Little nod to Batman v Superman in the background. Yeah, why not?
Oh my God, I forgot about that. What a nightmare reality we actually live in now.
Our painting reminds us that there's a strange fascination to digging holes alongside ancient oaks. You give the average man a shovel and an X on a map, and the fantasies come thick and fast. Pirate gold, hidden Confederate treasure, and sometimes the unexpected, and sometimes the unwelcome. Hence the title, Big Surprise.
Now, our next segment is by Richard Matheson, based on his short story, directed by Jeannot Swark. It is called Big Surprise, starring Vincent Van Patten, who is our second rock and roll high school alum for this season, Mark Vahanian, who I'll always know as Lolly 2 and Bless the Beast and Children, Eric Chase, and Mr. John Carradine. This is a tale of three boys befriended by a crazy old hermit who promises them a big surprise if they can dig it up. What'd you think of this one, Mike?
It's short. It's pretty simple. I'm not sure if I really got the twist at the end. It feels like this would have freaked me out when I was a kid, and I would have probably spent a lot of time thinking about it. Now that I'm 50 years old, I'm just like, yeah, I can't really be bothered.
What about you, Chris?
You know how A Matter of Semantics was a one-panel comic? This is like 3.
Yes.
This is a 3-panel comic. I don't know. Like, John Carradine is sufficiently creepy, but the fact that this is a short story is more surprising that Richard Matheson was able to wring as much out of this premise as he could from it being a short story, because there's barely anything here. It is really an old man tells a group of kids to dig. Those kids don't want to follow the kid who's blindly digging. And then the old man is in the box at the end. Like, there you go. Like, I'm not even sure what the story was. How do you turn that? How is that a short story? Let alone, how is that a 10-minute segment in this show?
A short story can be like 5 pages, you know.
I don't know how you get 5 pages out of this is more what I'm getting at. This is like one
You should read
page.
some Richard Matheson.
I can imagine you get that inner dialogue of the kids going, oh, there's probably something really valuable here. And just everybody has their own ideas of what's going to be that buried treasure. And then when it finally happens and describing the hot sun beating down on them and yada, yada, yada. Like, I could see this being a short story, but yeah, it was just, there wasn't a whole lot of substance to this one for me.
There's a skeleton of a good idea here. It's just to what end? It feels like this is a good setup for something, but I'm not sure the punchline is as funny or as interesting as maybe everyone else thought it was, Richard Matheson included.
Gentlemen, this is my favorite segment of the entire run of Night Gallery. I set it up at the top, right place, right time. I think I saw this when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. And yes, I spent many years pondering the meaning of this. I still haven't figured it out. But that obviously colors my judgment of it. Nevertheless, watching it like 2, 3, 4 times I did for tonight's recording here, I still love it. I think it's one of the best things on the show. Like, the way it's shot, nothing feels set bound. All the performances are good. The music, I really paid attention to the music, and we're going to have to talk about Gil Millet at some point, because he came up with he made a lot of instruments. So sometimes when you think you're hearing a waterphone or a synth, it's actually something that he's Frankenstein together. But I really like the music in this episode. It starts off almost comic with brass, but by the time they're digging, it's all bongos and these like shrieking violins. And by the end, it's just nothing but a sawing cello and this waterphone synth combination. It's fantastic. I love it. There are shots in it that I absolutely adore. I mean, at the start of this is, kids daring each other and, peer pressure and whatever. They don't want to, the old man's calling them over and they're calling each other chicken for not going over. And the lead kid, while he's deciding if he's going to go over and talk to old Mr. Hawkins, the shot is of him in the background, but in the foreground is the other kid, the Lolly 2 kid, his yo-yo just sort of dropping up and down in the frame. And it's just, I don't know, it just summed it up for me. I do need to say that if aliens are receiving television broadcasts from us in deep space, then I think they think the entirety of America looks like the hills just outside Los Angeles. That's the only failing for me in the episode, is once again we get the same sort of, well, we can drive 20 minutes and make it look different than the backlot. But at least they did that, because it doesn't look like the backlot to me. I think the ending works because Carradine is so fucking creepy. I want to speak to what you said, Chris, because I thought it too when I was watching it, like, this is effectively a Blackout sketch. It does now make me wish that all of the Blackout sketches were this, you know? Like, I enjoy laughing at Dracula as much as the next guy, but if you want to have an interstitial be this, then it would have elevated the whole series up.
And honestly, that's kind of where I came away from this specific segment, because we haven't gotten a lot of these kind of segments. Not a complete committal to it being half of the episode and not it being, you know, a Blackout sketch in between. We haven't gotten a lot of those on the show. And I feel like that's an untapped opportunity for the show makers and showrunners and writers to do something that's more in between, not a complete narrative, but also not just, you know, yuck, there's a vampire sucking somebody's neck. And that this kind of occupies that interesting middle ground made me appreciate this segment more than it might have if it had been just a Blackout segment. Because again, the opportunity for this to be a Blackout segment is there. Like, if they just cut some of this out, it really is just a Blackout segment. The fact that it's not, and that it's a little bit more than that, makes this one that I can completely understand where you're coming from, why it hit just right at the right time for you.
Yeah, and, you know, I was basically the age of these kids. And there's, you know, it felt at the time like it understood childhood. It still feels that way to me. Like, Serling at the stop in his intro for it, I thought he summed it up really well. He talks about, you know, childhood being obsessed with buried treasure, and X marks a spot. And like, there is a time in your life when that potential for adventure exists in your head. And maybe if I dig, I will find some treasure, you know? I'm just going to keep praising it over and over again. I did, like I said, turn the ending over and over again in my head. Like, I still don't know. Was he a ghost the whole time? Was he buried alive and that was his spectral form? Is he just some crazy old man who's dug a tunnel from his house to this thing? And I don't know. Like, every possibility is terrible. So that, I don't know. I love this one.
Our final offering, a study in depth of a gentleman from the academe, seen here at the lectern, delivering a most scholarly treatise. This particular class, I don't think you'll want to cut. The painting's title, Professor Peabody's Last Lecture.
Our last segment is called Professor Peabody's Last Lecture, written by Jack Laird and directed by Gerald Friedman. There's a rumor that Steven Spielberg actually directed this, but I couldn't find any facts to corroborate that, so just put it aside. This one stars Carl Reiner as the eponymous professor, and Larry Watson as August Derleth, Richard Annis as Robert Bloch, Louise Lawson as Hazel Held, you can see where this is going, and Johnny Collins as H.P. Lovecraft. They're all students in a lecture hall where an arrogant professor, dismissive of all superstition in all of its forms, runs headlong into a mythos he can't deny. What do you think about this one, Chris?
I like the idea of it. I think it's fun. I appreciate Carl Reiner, like, having no idea how to pronounce so many of the names of H.P. Lovecraft's, I guess, expansive backlog of weird Nugroths and Cthulhu creatures and Yellow Kings and Carcosa and everything else. I appreciated it. I really don't know as to what end. This felt like another Blackout sketch taken a little too... It felt like a Blackout sketch taken too far, and I'm like, why? Why this one? What gag did they think was so funny that they needed to repeat it like 8 times?
Yeah, it goes on for a long time before they get to that punchline of him changing, and I'm like, I see this coming a mile away that something bad is going to happen. I didn't necessarily see him with that fright mask with the eye sticking out, but I was like, we could have got here a lot sooner, guys.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's overwritten. It's over long by half. It's an 11-minute sketch. It should have been 5, if that.
It's 11 minutes. That's wild to me. It feels like 20. It feels so... It feels like it's thinking it's so clever that it's showing you these things out of context that only a certain group of people are going to know what they're talking about immediately. And it's like, I guess, but again, to what end?
Yeah, it feels almost precious in the use of this circle of writers, the sort of Lovecraft's people. You got to keep in mind that up until 1970 there were like a virtual handful of adaptations of Lovecraft's work: Haunted Palace, Die Monster Die, Crimson Cult, and Dunwich Horror. Those were 4 or 5 films, and Lovecraft had not appeared anywhere on TV. In that regard, I think this is actually a good introduction to him for the American TV viewing public. But that does not excuse this overlong script and this sort of slow grind to the conclusion. It feels a little bit like Laird was competing with Serling a little bit in the sheer verbosity. I disagree a little with you on this, Chris, about his pronunciation of most of Cthulhu, and like his pronunciations are actually pretty on point, which I appreciate. Also, when he starts reading from his Necronomicon, his pocket-sized Necronomicon, most of what he's reading is actually the Dunwich Horror from Lovecraft. It's like almost straight from the source, which I thought was weird, but it still works.
I was kind of confused as to what was the gag with having Lovecraft in the audience of students.
Yeah, I'm guessing like this gave him his ideas, and he was just like, "Ooh, gotta write this down. Oh, look at the power of these old gods."
A stuttering sort of, spitting H.P. Lovecraft. It was a rather unusual performance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised,
to say the least.
I'm surprised we didn't see more from Johnny Collins. I think this is his only credit.
As someone who appreciates Cthulhu and the works of Lovecraft, I like that it's getting highlighted in a segment on national television in 1971. But this time and spent with this group of characters, I think, is just a little long in the tooth. I don't know where they would have put the time. It's not like Matter of Semantics or Big Surprise needed more time. Neither did the diary. But I don't think it needed to be spent here, continuing with Carl Reiner just going on and on and on, and the gag not increasing in severity quick enough to really amp up the stakes. It takes too long to get to the punchline.
Why is it his last lecture? He seemed fine. Yeah, I know he was like,
right?
He's like asking questions and stuff, and I don't know if his lectures would be any good afterwards. I'd be eager to sit in on a lecture by a tentacled monstrosity. He still seemed very polite.
I'm with you on that. I would go and see his lecture where his like eyeballs pop out of his skull and are like flying around in front of his face.
I'd particularly want to see his lectures continuing to trash superstition. He's going to have to rethink his syllabus.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of a handheld Necronomicon. I think, if anything, that's the big takeaway from this segment, is having a pocket-sized Necronomicon, always handy to summon Cthulhu and friends.
I just so happen to have one here. Oh, really? Okay.
You were looking all over the world for one, but here it is.
Yeah. Do you
my
have the
pocket.
missing pages?
We're going to play a preview of the next episode, and we'll be right back to wrap things up.
Painting number 1. Out of the real estate section of a ghost town weekly. A gingerbready item quite appropriately called House with Ghost. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Night Gallery. As our third selection, an item from the past, that uniquely American institution known as the Pitchman, the wheeler and dealer of magical nostrums, guaranteed to cure, to palliate, to bring back the glow of health to everything but a cadaver. Mottled dreams, if you will. Our painting is called Dr. Stringfellow's Rejuvenator. Drink hearty. Our final selection this evening, an import from that other region, that infernal inferno down below, offered to you now in living color and with a small scent of sulfur. Our painting is called Hell's Bells.
That's right. On the next Midnight Viewing, we'll be taking a look at Season 2, Episode 9. That's broken into 4 segments. House with Ghost, Midnight Visit to the Neighborhood Blood Bank, again, Dr. Stringfellow's Rejuvenator, and Hell's Bells. Until next time, what are you working on and where can people find it, Mike White?
You can find my work over at the Projection Booth Podcast, which is part of the Weirding Way Media Network. So you can also get it at weirdingwaymedia.com.
How about you, Chris Stashu?
As for everything I work on, weirdingwaymedia.com, I do several weekly shows and several bi-weekly shows and several monthly shows. So I'm staying busy, and you should be busy listening to everything over at weirdingwaymedia.com.
As for me, what they said for my audio content, you're welcome to check out some of my other idiocy at fathermalone.com, but everything else is weirdingwaymedia.com. Thank you all for joining us here at Midnight Viewing. The gallery is now closed.